Well, so far we've looked at a lot of footwork, and that is important, and we will come back to footwork. It's important because in each one you have to understand that footwork isn't just about positioning yourself relative to the opponent, it's also about setting postures, more importantly, setting postures while you're moving. And if you don't get that, then you can't get Farley, you can't understand or use Farley, you can't take it into that next level, because setting the posture, or what Wang Xiangjai called rebound energy, is an absolutely critical part of that. And that's also very closely related to timing. So the Farley takes place over a very short range of time, so you've got to be able to time the steps with the techniques that you're doing with the rest of your body. But if you've been following along with the exercises, you're probably finding that you're not necessarily able to do the same kinds of things that I'm doing in terms of the technique, or not quite getting the same structural movement. That's because at a certain point you reach the 95% point. And that's the point where just to get 5% better doing that same thing would take so long it's not even worth it. In a holistic training method, you're much better off switching to a different kind of exercise, something related that ultimately is going to make it a lot easier. That other thing is going to improve organically on its own because you're training holistically in other things, and we're at that point now with footwork. And we've also looked at a lot of techniques and a lot of technical practice, so I think the important thing now is to move on to something else, and that's making contact with something. And I want to say there's a problem obviously in Yiquan. So there was a conference recently, and several third, fourth generation so-called Yiquan people in China attended this conference. And the idea of the conference was, how do you win a fight? And when I saw that, I thought, well, it's been 100 years or so since Wang Xiangjai started developing the modern concept of Yiquan. And if they haven't worked out how to win a fight at this point, then they really do have a problem. And rather mischievously, I imagined them all sat round a desk, all looking at each other, and one of them saying, has anyone got any ideas? Now, remember, this isn't really just coming from me. Wang Xiangjai student Yu Yongnian says that most third generation Yiquan people that he'd met some of the most famous, and he specifically says this includes some of the most famous, simply could not fight. They simply couldn't. Something was lost between that so-called second generation, that so-called third generation. Not in every case, but in a significant enough number of cases that they could have an enormous conference, which was advertised, by the way, as also having some sorts of fight competitions going on, or exchanges. But then, where's the video? There's nothing that indicates that they did do anything like that. All we can see is people doing Jianwu, and that is a significant problem. And it's also quite interesting because there's always this thing where people say each one doesn't have any forms, but then there's an entire conference with a significant number of people there, all very famous each one people, and the only thing that anyone can do practically is Jianwu. And that's been the case for quite a significant amount of time, I have to say. And the idea that this isn't forms training is simply preposterous. It is forms training. If someone did Chen Tai Chi, but they just did the moves in a different order, that would still be forms training. So just doing the same Jianwu moves over and over again, slightly different orders, that's just forms training, and everyone looks exactly the same, apart from some people have better whole body unified force than others. And if we're not seeing that, then we're seeing people do some kind of Farley. But what we're not seeing, or we're very rarely seeing, or there's just one or two sacred videos of people in China where you can see that people have got real practical skill, and that's something that people hold on to. Those videos circulate for maybe a couple of decades now because it indicates that there is something there for people who haven't seen that kind of thing in real life, like a Chinese Yiquan master actually with skill. If you haven't seen that in real life, then it's like this legendary thing, and you cling, like Zhao Daoxin says, cling to these videos like they're holy relics. So anyway, they meet up and they have a discussion about how to win a fight, and they have a committee meeting about it. And I thought, what would I bring to that table? And the answer is obviously boxing gloves, because Wang Xiangjai himself said, you can't just talk about it forever. I think he would have been appalled at the idea of a meeting, a committee meeting, where people just talk about it. And then I saw something else, because something else quite interesting is happening, where a lot of those people who learned Yiquan in China or trained with an Yiquan instructor in China and then came back to the West are getting on in years now, so they can almost get away with it, that they can just post pictures of themselves doing Shili or Jianwu, and somehow there'll be a kind of amnesia that they've never ever demonstrated once in the past 20 or 30 years that they can use their martial arts in any kind of practical way whatsoever. So I just saw one recently where someone had put up a video of themselves doing Shili. It's not the only one, they all do it. And someone had posted a comment saying, well, let's see the application. Now, good luck with that, because that will never happen. If it's not happened in the past 25 years, it's not going to start happening now, where they can say, oh, well, I'm too elderly to do something like that because I'm in my 50s now. And what you're going to get then, probably, I almost guarantee that there will be a message from this person responding saying, oh, this was all proven in the 1940s, 1950s, fighting gangsters, blah, blah, blah. And they're still living on that memory that, as I've talked about before, almost certainly didn't happen in any case. So what's gone on here? What's gone wrong here? And part of the problem is this idea of the internal mechanics of the body. And we've talked before about how Wang Xiangjai actually wrote about this. He's not talking about, well, there's this other thing where people keep saying that Wang Xiangjai didn't use the idea of qi, and that's not true. He was certainly using that idea well into his 70s, because we've got writing from him where he says he's in his 70s and he's using that idea of qi. But when he describes movements within each one, he talks about the body in very mechanical, maybe too mechanical terms, like pulleys and levers. But something goes wrong here, and Han Xihuang, Wang Xiangjai's student, talks about this idea. And I've said before, Han Xihuang's one of the smartest of Wang Xiangjai's students. He really thinks about the philosophy and sports science of it. And he says, look, there's two levels of training, two dialectics, and he uses this term dialectics. The first dialectic is the feeling of resistance in the body. This is the generation of the correct kind of feeling of whole body unified force. And I've said before, you've got to think about this. Whole body unified force is experienced in the body, but it exists in the mind. It's the mental control of the correct level of body consistency within the body. And that we can think of as a kind of programming for the body's hardware, but that trope creates too much of a sense of division between the mind and the body. We don't want to go that far, but we can think about it like that. And that idea is going to become very important now when we understand how we can change that consistency in the body. So that whole body unified force is a living, organic, dynamic thing. So for example, if you hit a bag that's quite light and then you hit a punch bag that's really, really hard, you can use that programming to change the consistency of the body to adapt to that. It changes in your body. And if you don't do that, you will hurt yourself. So this is a whole new level of dynamic use of whole body unified force that people will never ever get just practicing on their own on the air. And I also wanted to talk about that. So some people I've seen one particular person before who has absolutely outstanding whole body unified force, and I've told him himself, like, it looks amazing, but I've never once seen him in 20, 25 years do anything practical, any kind of put the gloves on, do some sparring or something like that. And it is an amazing achievement to take something like Shili to extremes. It's an achievement. It's good for, I suppose, physical conditioning in some way. It's not going to make you aerobically fit, which you do need. But if you are training on your own and you can't really do anything other than that, then maybe you could train like that, maybe that's okay. But he's not training on his own. He's got students and he's got access to punch bags, and he's certainly got access to boxing gloves. They're in the shop. They're just waiting for him to go and buy them to do some actual practical training. If all you ever do is focus on this idea, and I hear Yiquan people talk about this all the time, the idea of the internal consistency of the body, the development of Hun Yuan Li. If all you ever do is focus on that, you can become absolutely amazing at that. And as I always say, ultimately, that's like being the best in the world at having sex with yourself. It is an amazing achievement. Well, let's not say amazing, it is a remarkable achievement, but what does it actually mean in reality? Not much. Not if the idea is to hurt someone, to actually have a fight and hit someone with force. You'll never understand the difference. And it's no use saying, oh, well, some people had sex in the 40s, so that proves what we're doing is right. So Hansi Huang says you've got to think about it in terms of two dialectics. The first one that's been made into the most important thing ever in Yiquan, the internal consistency of the body, the development of Hun Yuan Li. That's been made into the most important thing. Actually, Hansi Huang says that's like elementary training. That's basic training. That's the first dialectic, resistance between the different parts of the whole body to get the correct feeling of bodily consistency. The second dialectic is when you bring that into resistance against an external object. And there are two ways that this is done. So one is through push hands or push hands related training exercises, and that helps you develop what we call guiding force. And that means taking whole body unified force and maintaining the correct structure, maintaining the correct body consistency in movement against resistance. So you can do it with push hands, you can do it with things like a Pilates ball, you can do it with a tree branch or something like that. There's lots of ways to do it if you've got someone to train with, if you haven't got someone to train with, but you do have to do it, and you'll feel immediately what a significant difference that makes, how it changes it. I tell you something, it takes almost nothing to unbalance you. Balancing is a very underrated skill. We're so delicately balanced, the slightest bit of resistance can push us off balance if we're not used to it. But obviously we need to do a significantly larger amount of stuff with push hands than just maintaining balance, so you have to bring it in to some kind of forceful resistance. Both of these things use whole body unified force, but they use them in different ways. I want to look at push hands separately. I've got loads and loads of stuff filmed on that I want to talk about. I'll show you all the tricks around push hands, but I want to start by looking at kinetic force, because that links in much more directly with everything that we've been looking at so far. But there is something that Wang Xiangjai says that applies to both, and he makes this point very clear, that you can't just think about training on your own. This is what we call solipsistic training. And solipsistic training, Wang Xiangjai says, is missing a massive part of the puzzle. That a massive part of what makes the physics of each one work is the other person. It's a double body. It's two people who are in contact with one another or hitting one another, and that changes the laws of physics that are involved in that dynamic. And Wang Xiangjai makes this explicitly clear. And you've also got to remember that Wang Xiangjai and his students, his direct students, were interested in fighting in a way that most Yiquan people aren't now. And I understand that, and you can take whatever you want from Yiquan, but those people who aren't interested in actual practical training have somehow taken over, taken those positions of authority, and then they start rolling back the things that Wang Xiangjai was actually talking about. So everyone's got to stay in their lane. That's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine if you don't want to do that kind of practical training, but support the people who are doing the actual full thing, the real thing. And that includes respecting what Wang Xiangjai actually taught. So Wang Xiangjai says there's something that happens. So we're going to focus on kinetic force. We'll come back to push hands. There's something that happens when you hit someone. You hit something or an object or a person. And I have talked about this idea before. It's what we call a compression set. So a compression set is the idea that when you generate kinetic force through a short, sharp movement, which is a key element of Farley, when you generate that kinetic force, it's got to be transmitted into a target. It's not enough just to do it on the air. And how do you do that? Well, we try and do it in the most efficient way possible. And also it's overdetermined because all of these things, the footwork, the set, the compression set, the strike, the timing with the opponent, for it to genuinely be Farley, it's all got to happen in a very short space of time. Farley is a very small movement. There's all these discussions online that, frankly, they're quite racist. They're kind of imperialist ideas that Farley is just anything. It's just any kind of fast or powerful movement, and people in Western martial arts or Western sports do it better. They understand this concept better than the people who invented it in China. That's a racist idea, by the way. Actually, it's like saying people in China were not capable of having independent sports science concepts on their own. Farley is a very specific concept, and it's nothing to do with magic. Whether it's something to do with chi or not doesn't matter. There's no need to explain it in those terms, but it's not magic, and it's not just anything. What's the point even in Chinese martial arts if it's just anything? Anyway, from that short, sharp movement, when you hit an object, you need to transmit that kinetic force as efficiently as possible into the target. And if your body is more compressed, if it's like a more solid object, it will transmit force much more easily. And this is a law of physics that Wang Shengjai explicitly recognizes, that because we're trying to solve this problem with Farley of doing the movement in as short a space as possible, and there's lots of reasons for that. I don't want to talk about that now, but because that's the problematic that he's trying to solve, every little helps towards that. And so the idea that a body can become more solid and transmit force much more efficiently, that's absolutely ideal. That's exactly what we want. And that means that you can do a shorter movement that might not seem all that powerful when you do it on the air, but when you hit something, it compresses the body. Like the actual act of hitting something compresses the body. And this is one of the reasons setting is so important, because setting, you can think of it like anchoring you back into the ground, and the other, let's say your fist, your jab, is punching someone in the face. And between the face and the ground, as you expand with kinetic force dynamically, which is Farley, using open, close, rise, sink, as you do that, then at the point of contact, at the point of hit, it has this effect of like compressing the whole body structure, and that makes the transmission of kinetic force more efficient. It's as simple as that. And that's what we call the whole body set. And simple as it is, it's incredibly difficult to do on the fly. It's incredibly difficult to do in live training. It's incredibly difficult to do when someone is smacking you back in the face. And this is where things like other discussions on the internet, like does it matter whether or not you wear gloves or something like that? It doesn't matter that much. Most people have never been punched in the face anyway, so they don't know that even with gloves on, even what looks like light sparring is massively impactful when you're actually getting punched in the face. And most of those people anyway who are talking about these things from either sides of the debate have never had a bare knuckle fight. And I'm telling you, in a bare knuckle fight, actually it does make a difference that you're not wearing gloves. Just the slightest dink, bare knuckle, and you've got a big black eye for days. All of those things actually do add up when we're talking about a very, very small movement. Farley's a small movement. When we're talking about how do we maximise that small movement, then every little thing that contributes towards it helps. But actually, you can do it with gloves on, no problem. It's just a little bit of the potential damage that you could do is taken away. So that excuse that you can't do this with gloves on, that's just absolutely nonsense. That's just people who don't understand the concept, but that's why I'm here to explain it. So that's what we're going to start looking at now. In effect, we're going to start looking at bag work. Bag's better than pad work for this. Pad work's a totally different thing. Bag work gives you weight, and it's the weight that you need when you hit something that creates the compression set. So we're going to look at building on what we've done in the beginner series, building up into the next level, the next stage of this, and that will organically help us understand Farley. It's a lot easier to do it this way. I think this is the way I did it, and I found it much easier to do it like this. I couldn't get it just practicing it on the air. I had to get it in with a sense of contact against something, and that made it a lot easier to get in the end.